The patience of Ukrainians is over, as they decided to hit Russia with a secret weapon and prepare 500,000 of people for the last stand. But more about all this in just a couple of minutes. What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Today, unfortunately, I am sick with the 2020 thing. But I will do my best to record the video for you guys. I don't want to leave you in the dark, so please enjoy and thank you so much. And to begin with, let's make a quick stop on Crimean Peninsula, where according to the General Staff of Ukraine, they were able to destroy a pretty massive radar of Russians. Next to go to Zaporozhye front line, where according to Ukrainian sources, they were able to destroy a pretty big assault group of Russians in Novoprokopivka. And as we go to the east of Ukraine, specifically to Kharkov front line, right here is the video of Ukrainians using just 2 drones to destroy a Russian T-80BM modern tank, completely obliterating the machine. But Russians, they came up with the protection for these tanks, such as, for example, you can see right here, which is according to the internet is called the Royal Barbecue Grill. The effectiveness is quite suspicious, they're quite unconfirmed. But unfortunately, according also to Ukrainian forces, Russians recently intensified their offensive, such as, for example, in one single day they can make up to 50 assault attempts. And the most intense combat activities are in Kharkov frontline and are in Bakhmut frontline. And such as, for example, as you can see right here, Russians were able to make a relatively significant progress in Kharkov frontline, advancing extremely close to Tabaivka settlement. But luckily, in another direction, specifically Terny, this is also where Russians are trying to advance. But Ukrainians are easily repelling these attacks so far, creating yet another cemetery of the Russian military vehicles. And obviously, we cannot ignore the most intense combat zone in the entire east of Ukraine, Avdiivka, where Russians continue their daily assaults, which end, 99% of them end, as always, in the complete failure, the destruction of the military vehicles and the elimination of the Russian infantry. And such as, for example, right here is the most recent video from this settlement, where Russians cannot even withdraw their infantry from the armored personnel carriers. They're being obliterated on the way. They try to turn around and run as fast as possible, but they cannot do this either. The entire video is not extremely long, but it's still fully packed with some action, because this is as much as Ukraine needs to repel such attacks. And that is why you can see the fully uncensored version on my Patreon, link is down below, and as always there is 1 week of free access plus 10% off promotion. Once again, the link is down below, thank you so much. And last but not least, Ukrainians were also able to intercept a Russian Su-34 fighter jet in Luhansk region. So as you can see, there was quite a lot of combat activities of Ukrainians against military targets of Russians. So the question is, what is the response by Russians? Well, unfortunately, it is quite often the very same one. And before we can talk about this, guys, if you do appreciate this style daily updating and if you want me to recover faster, can you please simply like this video and subscribe to my channel? I don't know how it will help, but trust me, it will. You can also follow me on Instagram, we're getting close to 10,000, the link is down below. And so yes, speaking about the response by Russians, unfortunately these were several more attacks against civilian objects of Ukrainians in their territories, such as, for example, in Kiev, in Kharkov, in Mirnograd Donetsk region, and even in Kryvyi Rog, located right here, the birth town of Zelensky. And no surprise, unfortunately, that this is the only way Russians can respond is by continuously terrorizing the civilian population of the country. And interestingly enough, and also very suspiciously convenient, one of Russian headquarters of the Communistic Political Party in Moscow spontaneously got caught on fire recently. And just in general, unfortunately, in the last 24 hours, Ukrainian air defense was only able to intercept 15 out of 35 Russian Shahid drones. And speaking about the drone attacks, right here is an extremely interesting statistics which can be counted since the beginning of this war, showing which military targets both sides prioritize when attacking with drones. For example, from the very first video, both Ukraine and Russia used drones against infantry more or less in the same ratio 1-to-1. The next picture shows that Russians use drone attacks against trenches and positions. Concentration of Ukrainian forces much more frequently, 10 times more to be specific, but Ukrainians are mostly prioritizing destroying Russian military vehicles and equipment with drones, making this three times more higher, more frequent statistics than the same of Russians. And just since the beginning of this year, according to President Zelensky, Russians launched 330 plus metallic cylinders and also approximately 600 combat drones. For this reason, he is saying that one of the biggest priorities for Ukraine as always remains the same: to protect the sky of Ukraine. And luckily, Ukraine recently received one of the most advanced air defense system called Skynex, specifically designed to combat against drones and missiles. And one of the interesting ways how it operates is it launches hundreds if not thousands of small balls to intercept these very small targets. And yes, the full video of operation of this air defense with the commentary will also be available on my Patreon, link is down below. And nevertheless, and rightfully so, Ukraine's patience is pretty much over. That is why they start assembling a military of more than 500,000 people, which they will be using to fight against the invaders from Russia. And then they also reportedly use a secret weapon against the Z army. And first of all, speaking about the 500,000 soldiers, according to the Ukrainian Major General Viktor Nikhalyuk, the country is ready to train however many soldiers they need, whether it is 100, 200 or even 500,000 people. Ukraine already has the capabilities of doing this, because as of right now, reportedly 20% of them are being trained abroad, while 80% of the Ukrainian military is being trained in the house. And throughout these almost 2 years of war, Ukrainians were able to precisely adapt to the current modern warfare, such as, for example, they were able to change their practicing, exercising and training facilities and also preparations just in general to make training of future soldiers to be even more effective. And that is why, according to Viktor Nikhalyuk, is this precisely how Ukraine will be able to train as many people as they need. Besides that, as mentioned previously, approximately 20% of Ukrainian military is being trained abroad, and since these are some of Ukrainian soldiers who continue their military exercises after already experiencing the actual combat and actual warfare, this is when they bring the real-life experience to the Western practices, to the Western coaches and trainers, and this is when they can apply these new techniques and change if needed accordingly. So this is a combination of very good and precise theory in combination with the real life experience. And ultimately, according to Viktor Nikhalyuk, the most requested part of the Ukrainian military, which needs these people, as many of them as possible, is the simple infantry. Because according to him, it is infantry which pushes forward. It is infantry that takes back the land. It is infantry which is repelling the attacks by Russians, and it is infantry which is frequently liberates cities and towns and ultimately the rest of Ukraine. And obviously, the infantry cannot do much, unfortunately, without proper equipment and weapons. That is why, according to the head of the Ministry of Strategy and Industry, Alexander Kamyshin, Ukrainians are already been using so-called secret weapons against Russians. He obviously did not specify which exactly secret weapons these are, otherwise simply they will stop being secret, makes sense, right? But he did hint us that all these most recent attacks against a very distant objects of Russians inside their territory, whether this is Moscow, St. Petersburg or even more distant cities in the central Russia, this is when he hinted that these were done thanks to these new and secret weapons, which have been developed in so-called underground laboratories with very few people having limited access to this technology. And according to him, even though this might sound like a James Bond movie, underground laboratories, all this kind of stuff, what he basically says is that Ukraine unfortunately will never be able to catch up with Russia in terms of number of military vehicles and weapons produced. That is why they have to come up with some unusual solutions, such as, for example, this secret weapons, which once again Ukrainians will be developing now and in the future, and since the war is already going on, there is only one place where they can test them: in the actual theater of conflict. Because, I mean, yes, we can all agree that whenever distant Russian objects deep inside Russia were attacked, most likely with the help of Ukrainian technology, it already kinda sounded unbelievable how Ukraine can do this. It is so far inside Russia. What is Russian air defense system doing? Can they not intercept those aerial targets? Apparently they cannot. Which, by the way, just think about it. What else will Ukraine be capable of constructing and developing in the future in terms of the secret technologies, and which other major military objects and territories of Russians can be retaken by Ukrainians as a result of this? And so yes, guys, my throat is already killing me, so once again, if you want me to recover as fast as possible, please subscribe. Thank you so much, patrons, for your support, and see you tomorrow.